Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are in Buena Vista, Colorado, where we are about to go to a historical museum right here in downtown. I can't wait to take you on this one. I've been wanting to come here for a long time, so let's go. Okay, we are now inside of this amazing museum, and each section is going to be dedicated to a different kind of activity or piece. And then there's a few interesting things here that have been restored that we're going to be able to look at. Now, inside this booklet, there's a little bit of information about the old courthouse, which is the building that we're standing in. And at one point in time, this was a courthouse that was used here in the Buena Vista area. And I think that it's absolutely beautiful to see the attention to detail and work that they have done. So I'm just going to show you around a little bit, and then we'll get to some of the facts. In this large expanse of a room, you can see some beautiful things, and they are restoring many of the pieces of this to their original integrity, including the woodwork, the trim, the beautiful lighting, and so many more things. Now, the ultimate goal is to bring this back to its full historic beauty. And in doing so, each time a person visits the museum, there's a $5 admission, and that goes toward projects that help improve this property. And so I think that that's really neat. Inside this expanse, you can see that they can host events, they can do incredible things, and because of that, they are a staple of the community. But there's a lot more here, and I just wanted to start you off with this so you could kind of get some context as to what this is and why they use it the way that they do. But now, it's time for us to dive in. Just off to the side of the courtroom, they have a beautiful model railway from the Buena Vista Model Railroad Society. You can walk in here and you can see the timeline of places and locations playing out. And this is so incredible. In here, they have several different things that we're going to kind of focus on, including that they start off over at the Royal Gorge. This area is the famous Royal Gorge of the Arkansas River. The original grade was cut through by the Santa Fe Railroad, and there was controversy. The mining area on the wall represents St. Elmo and Romley, and the well-known Mary Murphy mine was actually located in this area. Then we move up to Salida, where there was a major hub, and the narrow gauge tracks were the first that were laid here in the spring of 1880. This is pretty incredible to see. It takes you around a timeline, but also all of the locations that were along this railway, and the details are incredible. I'm just going to show you around a bit more, and as I do, I'll tell you a bit about the scenes that we're seeing so that you can better understand the expanse of this space. But one of the things I thought was really neat in this is it's not just you seeing it, you can also see some interesting things here. They have a little I Spy game, and the I Spy game has some very unique things. For example, you can look for Bigfoot or an elephant rock or Mount Elbert or the Hanging Bridge, Treehouse. There's a Skinny Dipper. There's even a hobo camp. As we move from Salida, we get to Buena Vista. Here we have the community that we are in currently, including in the center area there, the museum. You'll notice that the museum was located right around the area that the trains ran, and the community kind of spawned around that with the robust downtown system. There were two different rails that would come through town, kind of flanking on each side, as well as one that kind of went out further around the community. And in doing so, you can see how the format of the original community was laid out. But also, you can see what buildings from this original format might still exist today. In addition, it says that we see these 4 rock tunnels, and these were from the Colorado Midland. And these tunnels became necessary and were already in place close to the east bank of the river. And there were 4 large rock figures coming down the river and the mountainside. And the Midland was forced to bore through the 4 tunnels that you see here. And the Granite, Colorado area is represented here. It's about 18 miles north of Buena Vista, and the Colorado and Midland Station is the 2-story yellow building that we see right here. Now, there were very few mines, but major mining activity on the river itself in this area. So this is why this was such a necessity in this region. However, as we continue going, we go to a much more mining-rich Leadville, which is just up the mountain a bit further. And here you find Leadville was where gold was first discovered in the 1860s, but there was a lot of trouble that were caused by a black substance. Now, after visiting Leadville, we already know that this is a lead-based substance and they became the lead capital. After that, they kind of went through several booms, several busts, and ultimately landed in some pretty hard times. However, the community persists and is actually a really great community to visit today, and they've capitalized on that mining history with the National Mining Museum, which is really cool. As you are looking through, you can see the various mines that they had, including the Little Johnny mine and some of the others. You can see the Tabor Bar. You can see where the fire department was, how they had a machine shop. They had the Clear Grit mine, the Little Chief, and it just continues to go on and on. Again, the numerous trains are representing the kinds of trains that have rolled through these areas over the years. Each of the areas has something unique to kind of show you what that town would have looked like. And you get a glimpse into a community that has changed a lot over the years. I think you can see why this is such a neat attraction to come and see, especially for people who enjoy the railroad. And so this is just one part of this museum though, but let me just tell you, every detail here is incredible. Look at these hinges even, and the doorknobs, wow. Speaking of the railway, here you can find some of the historic photos and learn a little bit more about the area through these historic photos. I love seeing these because they capture a time and place that is very different than now, and you can see what things looked like in their heyday. So you can see some of the styles and fashions. You can see what the railroad depot looked like in 1918. You can also see how they had cut through the mountain, and some of these areas have now been made into rail-to-trail areas, and I think that's pretty neat. Additionally, you can see these two photos of two different locomotives. These were from 1918, and these were the Wild Horse, Colorado yards. And you can see that during World War I, operation of the Colorado Midland Railroad became part of an effort to move massive amounts of freight for the war effort. And these are the trains that did it. Additionally, there are some other items here that are from the time, and you can see everything from these items, which were timetables, to various union agreement books. They have some of the dishes that would have been available for the Midland route. There's even a matchbook down here. Right here they have a huge piece of coal, and coal was burned in steam engines to produce the heat that powered the train. And here we find one of the most disastrous train wrecks from 1926 in Granite, Colorado. A passenger train derailed approximately 2 miles northwest of Granite, and the wreckage was scattered. It killed approximately 30 and injured 54 people. Another train wreck here at Happy Jack's cabin area in Granite, 1921. These are some of the things that they would have used in the trains, including kerosene to fill the switch lamps. They were carried in these containers. They also have an ash can. There's a railroad wrench that was stamped from usage during this time. They have a really neat picture here showing how these rail tongs are used, where you can see not only the tongs, but also how it would take 2 people to properly use these. The train crew would have lamps that would signal other members of the crew, including the engineer, and they would look like this. They have date nails, and the nail would be hammered into a tie to show the age of the ties. And you can see on the tops of these, if you look very carefully, that they have numbers on them. Now this entire wall is filled with beautiful pictures of all of the trains that have run in these regions. But next to that is this door that actually shows you cutting through the Royal Gorge on a train. Now, to this day, there's still a train that runs through the gorge. You can take a trip on it. Highly recommend. Some of my friends from Mountain House did that last year, and it put it on my bucket list for sure. Now, I know a lot of this is based on photos and historic record. However, that's why we come to places like this, so we can put history into context. And by seeing it from the actual photos, we're able to do that a lot easier. And so coming through, take your time, just look through these. Each of these are captioned and have little tags to tell you what they are. And then you can also connect with the book that they give you when you first come in to learn a little bit more. But now we're gonna move downstairs because there's some more displays. Now, as we move around the downstairs area, each section is going to have its own theme, but I wanted to start out here with a little bit of heritage, again, referencing some of the historic photos. And this shows you some of the amazing history of this community. And so I just kind of wanted to point out this section because it's definitely something that'll put some context to all the things that we've seen here in this region. But if you look around, you'll also see some interesting dates that explain kind of the timeline of this community. For example, the courthouse was used between 1883 and 1932, but in more recent years, from 1974 to the present, it was a museum, or is a museum, but it was also used as part of the public education system. So each of these photos is going to reflect a different portion of time for the community and what purpose at that time that the building served. And then as we go down, you can see other pieces of history also. For example, this one right here, when we were last in town, we actually stopped off right here and took a walk around a small lake. That was right where this is now located. However, you'll notice that this beautiful place that we saw once looked kind of like this. And in fact, it was severely damaged by a fire and it had to be moved into place, and it has been restored. And as you see it from its original form, moving down this timeline, you can see the work and dedication that the community has taken just to get it to where we can enjoy it today. And I think that that's pretty neat. Additionally, the Turner Farm and St. Elmo both have a unique story. Of course, we have been up to St. Elmo here on the channel before, and I highly recommend you visiting if you have an opportunity. It is definitely one of the most interesting places that I have visited. I've been there twice. Once I went and it was a little creepy. The second time it was much more populated. On that original trip, I went up there and I was late in the day and it was late in the season and no one was there except for me and some snow, and it was very quiet. But the second time I went up during a more populated time of year and it was absolutely epic. All the businesses had their doors open so you could kind of look in and see the history, and it was really cool. I definitely recommend that as a trip that you take. And it's just a fun way to see some history here in this region. However, we're about to move into each of these displays, which is going to teach us even more. And I think it's fitting that we started off with St. Elmo because we're moving into the mining and mineral room. Ooh, this is really neat how they started this room out with all of the tools of the trade. Again, everything is labeled. This is a canvas ore bag. They also have the story of the canaries, and the canaries were used in mines to help detect poisonous gases that were harmful to humans. Currently, the mine display is closed. However, we can go into this area and see all of the different rocks and minerals, which, oh my goodness. Again, more historic photos showing you just what life in those mines might have been like. It was dark, it was dingy, it was dirty, and it was hard work. However, at one point, they moved into something a little bit more advanced, and that's whenever a generator like this one would have been in place. This was a generator that supplied the power for the entire town of Alpine, including the mines. Now, as we go through each one of these, you'll notice that there's a tag as to where they came from, what their name is, what their composition is, and then also if they're from a private collection. Some of these are stunning. It's interesting to see that they have pieces from all over, just to kind of give us an idea of some of the amazing minerals and gems that are out there. California, Australia, New Mexico. This opal is from Mexico. They have something from South Dakota here, Kansas City. Then this lava from Craters of the Moon in Idaho. This is one of the more interesting things. This is Dean Yell of Buena Vista displaying his bust of Gerald Ford. And according to this, he was featured in the newspaper, and you can see that it is his collection that we're looking at right now. But it's not just Gerald Ford, it's all of the different presidents and different unique minerals. In fact, Dean Yale specialized in carving semi-precious gemstones using only a few tools, and he has been awarded nationally for his work numerous times. But this particular collection right here is one that we can see in the museum using semi-precious stones from Colorado, Oregon, Brazil, Mexico, Wyoming, India, and Montana. Pretty fascinating to see, and you can see that also he's been featured in several magazines, including this one from Empire magazine in 1974. Of course, learning about mining, we couldn't go without learning about the bell signals. And here you learn about how the hoist would be signaled by a number of bells to tell them what was coming up or what was needing to go down. And based on that, they would have a communication from down below to up above. So get a chance to look at some of the mining tools that they would have used, including blasting earphones for dynamite explosions. They had all sorts of lamps, and safety became paramount in the mines at one point as a result of some really bad things that happened. We learned in Tennessee that there was a huge incident where basically everyone in Rocky Top, Tennessee passed away who was in the mines. And after that, they started changing some of the regulations for how they did mining. And some of that included the tools that they'd use, some of it included the practices, and some of it included the age of labor. We have some oversized spikes from an old dairy dredge at Lake County, a gold panning pan, as well as a sample, which is so tiny up there. Here we have miners drill, and one miner would hold this while another would hit it with a hammer. And there are more beautiful samples. And of course, I'm showing you a few of these. However, there are a lot more, so I definitely encourage you to come here. Again, it's $5 and it goes right back into the community. Now, each time we move out into the hall, we get a little bit more of a glimpse into the work that they're doing here on the courthouse through these particular updates. And it says here, like, all the different things that they've been working on, but then you can also see the story of bringing the courthouse back to life. Oh, this is kind of fun, guys. You can make your own sign as to what you were in trouble for, and then you can take your picture behind this jail cell door. It's kind of fun. It's just a fun way to kind of interact with our environment around us. Stealing water. Now, this jail cell door that you get to pose behind is actually from the local police department. And so it's better to be in it here than it would have been to be at the police department in it, let's say. Oh, wow. This room is incredible. So there's a lot of different things in this one that I think are fascinating. So this room is incredible. There's a lot of things in here that I think are pretty fascinating. So we're going to take our time and just kind of move around. I think we're going to start out over on this side with some of the military honors. Inside here, there are a grouping of different local uniforms that were used, people who served from the county, and some of the things that they were able to share. Also, this embossed wallet of G.M. Pyle, George Pyle, who was the owner of one of the gas stations here during the 1930s. Pretty interesting. These are square-toed boots that belong to one of the soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division. Of course, we know that the 10th Mountain mostly trained out at Camp Hale, which is not too far from here. These uniforms are very well preserved. And in addition to those, you can see some of the photos of some of the people wearing them. In addition, there are some items that are more synonymous with the Nazis, and they became very predominant in people's collections as they wanted to document history. And in the documentation of these items, it is a reminder that they did murder 6 million European Jews, as well as people of color, people from the LGBTQIA community, people with learning disabilities, and anyone who is considered to be a lesser human. Now, the reason why I choose to show those things on my channel, as always, is because we need to learn from the past to make a better tomorrow. Seeing things like this that still exist today should remind us of the tragedies that happened and how the people from this county and other counties throughout the United States put their foot down and said, this is not okay, we're not going to do this, and how they stood up for those who were being harmed. And I think that it's really important to have displays like this that show the contrast between the two, because without understanding the bad, you can't understand the good quite as much. And so I'm always appreciative to our troops because they stand up for what is right and just. And in doing so, honoring them in a place like this is very important. Now, next up, we have a very interesting display about some of the firefighters in this area. This was a chest piece from a firefighter's uniform in 1895. You can also see some of the photos that go along with that and how that would have been worn. These artifacts were left over from the 1890s and they belong to Harry Foreman. They were donated to the museum so that they could stand in his honor, but also show us again the piece of the past. This cabinet right here, this was from the original courthouse. Of course, behind the military display, you can also see the chalkboards, which were here from the original school that took place in this very building as well. On this side of the room, we have a book press, we have a paper cutter, and these were used here in the Buena Vista area as well. And you can even learn a little bit of the history of this particular one. This one is very fascinating. It was from 1889, and it was known as the manual guillotine for paper cutting. Here we have some interesting pieces as well, including some token coins, and they're sometimes used as a substitute for legal tender when it comes to businesses, military bases, and arcades. And they were even used as local currency sometimes to be locally used for one specific business or another. This is a grocery receipt, a handwritten grocery receipt for $6.50 for 1886 for Will Turner, and this was from Como, Colorado. And I think this is pretty neat. They have the hot springs, some of the original signage for that, as well as a blacksmith and wagon repairing. Working your way around this room, I think you can see there's a lot of great information and a lot of interesting things that you don't necessarily see everywhere. But this is something you definitely won't see just everywhere. This is the 10th Mountain Division. These are artifacts that have come along from the 10th Mountain, which again, trained up at Camp Hale, which we visited before. And we learned about their legacy and how that they were pivotal in changing the way that we were in combat in World War II. And so I think that this is pretty impeccable, but I have to show you the details. Now here, this is a World War II wool sleeping bag liner. And as we know, the 10th Mountain, they were trained to work in the harshest of conditions. They would ice climb and rock climb, and they would ski, and they would do all sorts of things that were harder than most. I would consider these guys to be probably some of the toughest of the tough based on how they had to travel and also what they had to learn. Now, these guys were up there using Camp Hale because it had rugged terrain, so they were learning to climb on that rugged terrain. But then again, it wasn't just the rugged terrain that they were learning to climb on. They learned to traverse it in the winter months, in the summer months. They learned how to climb it, to ski it, to navigate it, to do all the things. They would snowshoe, and it was said to be one of the harshest training programs in the entirety of the military. And in some of the contexts that I read, they said that it was very similar to what the Green Berets or the Navy SEAL would have to do now in way of toughness. So these guys are not to be messed with. In this section, we have some different items from around the county again, including this, which I think is just absolutely spectacular looking. This is beautiful. You also think it's kind of interesting that they have a retail beer license here, and also rubber made from weed in factory, and this was the American Rubber Producing Company. They have a dental setup right here that was donated by a doctor from the dental field right here in Buena Vista. It brings us back around to this section where we can see some of the various animals that you might find in this region. On this section, we have a bunch of different kinds of outdoor equipment, which of course this area is known for outdoor recreation. So as we move along, we can get a better look at each one of them, but then also you can see photos throughout time of how rafting has changed or how kayaking has changed, and give it a little bit of historic context. Like this right here is pretty interesting because this is a photo that shows how the oar frame that we're looking at, this big silver oar frame, would have been used and attached to an inflatable raft. and it could be used for multi-day trips. But then you can look here and you can see a wooden frame that is very similar to that and how it would have been fitted for one of these trips as well. It is fascinating to see that there's so many different versions and when each one became more efficient and more popular. Now, rafting became popular here in the 80s, and within only 4 years, they put in guidelines and regulations for registering so that there could be some kind of safety standard in place. So between 1980 and 1984, a big shift kind of took place in the market so that people could make sure that they were being guided correctly. They had safety protocols within the boats themselves, and just not everybody can get out there and get hurt, basically. Again, it's just neat to kind of see these though. You can see that they have been well loved and worn. Additionally, you can see some beautiful river pictures here so you can understand the Arkansas River area a bit more. By 1987, they began to do river trips in this region that were more organized. And here you can see some of what the Arkansas River points are where those trips take place. This one's pretty neat because you can see this lady is inside this. And this was built in 1992 by Portia Benson. It was a high school project, and she built this by hand, and clearly it does well. But not only that, she was able to take this out and use it on still water when she was in Wisconsin as well. So that's pretty neat to know that her creation was able to not only do well, but also do really well. So that's just one. Of course, we saw this one back here, but there's 3 or 4 more that I want to show you as well with a little bit more context. This one's much longer, of course, but it's right next to this guy who has a story, and this is an Eskimo Topolino, and it was introduced in 1980. It was manufactured in Germany, and it's considered a high-performance polyethylene frame and body. And this one is 7 feet 2.6 inches, and it weighs approximately 33 pounds. It's only 24.4 inches across. So it's pretty interesting. But in 2012, Outside Magazine published their list of the most influential gear of all time, and this was named to that list. Now, this guy is considered to be a short boat in comparison to the longer ones that we're seeing, and it's a very specific style of boat. So different boats have different purposes, and they could be for speed, they could be for accuracy, they could be for racing, they could be for tumbling through rapids. So each one of them has a very specific purpose. It's really fascinating to learn more though. But not least, we're going to stop off at the Women of the West. And here we find out about homesteaders, madames, barbers, mothers, doctors, and outlaws. And again, this is another big room filled with all sorts of fun things. So we're just going to pick our direction, and I think we should start right here. Oh, this is really neat. So this has various pieces of history in here from the Ute tribes, and you can see the tribal lands, the legend of the bear dance, and then what that means, how it's done, what the story behind it is. And this is a great place to start because these were the first women that were here. Now, inside this case, you see a variety of different points. You also see some of the grindstones that they would have used for various items. And that could have been for corn, that could have been for other things that need to be ground down. And then you find this, which is considered to be a leaned pole structure, and they would use pine and juniper and willow, and they would create shelters. There is a depiction of life for the people, the first people here. And again, I definitely recommend this book because it tells you a lot more. But then we move into our next set of people, which were the pioneers, or the people who moved into this region seeking out homesteading or parts of the mines. And in doing so, you see a very different aspect of life come into play. For example, here we have all things washing. So we have how hot water would have been used to use a steam washer. There is a copper boiler for heating wash water. You also have up here a wooden washing machine used by the Turner family on trail drives. And then you see all of the different aspects of ironing with ironing boards, and even places that they could dry things. This was a Singer Sears and Roebuck drop head new queen sewing machine that was sold for $10.45 in 1902, and it had a 20-year guarantee. It was also sold on this solid oak cabinet, And then they even have the clipping from the original catalog here. Now, if you are interested in all things cleaning throughout the years, I definitely encourage you to go to another location, the Museum of Clean in Pocatello, Idaho. It's pretty fascinating. They have a very in-depth collection, so you can find these plus many, many more. It's a very specific niche of a museum, but I think you would enjoy it, so go check it out if you can. Otherwise, I have a video of it. Go check that out. Now, in this corner, we learn about Cockey Liz, and there's several items in here which are synonymously known with Cockey Liz, including that Liz arrived in Buena Vista and she brought all of her clothes in a trunk very similar to this one. Now, this is Liz a few years into her life, definitely. This was her at her home at the Edwards apartment, which had once been known as the Palace of Joy. As you can imagine with that name, you can probably figure out what Liz was. Liz was definitely a madam, and she was quite the madam from what this description says. It's kind of interesting to see, but it would also explain the style of clothing that she chose to wear, the colors she chose to wear, and also some of the other things that we see in here. In fact, it says here that in the mid-1880s, trains were regularly coming and going, and they were bringing in passengers and goods and carrying lots of people here, and a newcomer hired a horse-drawn carriage, and it was Lizzie Spurgeon. And she was probably asked. Now, Liz, or Lizzie, was known to have an interesting sense of humor. She was known to be definitely a force in the community, and she had a lot to say. But at one point, this madame turned into a little bit of a different character. But why? Because she fell in love. Story of most of the Western stories that I've seen. You take a lady who was working in the saloon, or a lady who was a lady of the night, and they meet somebody and they suddenly became an upstanding citizen. That's what happened with her too. She became quite a pivotal part of the community as a result, and it's, well, what they say, the rest is history. There's also a couple of other interesting photos here. These are the wedding photo of Mabel and Charles Matlock, and then a 12-year-old Colorado Hewitt. She was born on the sea of the USS Colorado, and her mother died in childbirth. The ship's captain named the baby after the ship, and she later married Thomas Milson in Leadville and had 2 children. Again, these cases are filled with all sorts of items that were once worn by some of the ladies of the community. You might be surprised just the delicate nature of some of these, how they've held up over time. Now, this is pretty interesting. Brass tokens or love tokens were used to make sure that the madams got their cut. The gentleman would purchase a token for a set price and then hand it over to the girl of his choosing, and at the end of the night, the girls would return them all to the madam and get their money. However, the madam would get their cut out of these also. So you can see what these look like. Now, here we have the legend of the Lady Bandit. Her name was Jane Kirkham. And 7/10 of a mile north of Balltown, a white marble grave marker can be found on the Arkansas River to signify her final resting place. Now, this is kind of a sad story because at one point in time, there was this bandit who was terrorizing people. And it was this woman. And the sheriff decided that they were going to go after this person. And so they basically disguised themselves and then went to go after her. And in doing so, they shot her, only to realize that it was the sheriff's wife the whole time. That's kind of a weird story. It's kind of a sad story. To close out this room, I wanted to show some very interesting things in this section about the 19th Amendment and how the people of this particular county and the connecting counties all rallied to have the right for women to vote. And this was a huge piece of history here. In fact, when the Constitution originally started, women were denied basic things that men were not. And so the women across the country stood together and they created a movement which inspired the 19th Amendment. See, one thing that history has taught me throughout time is that as we have moved throughout time, we have gained certain things that weren't necessarily there from the beginning. But at the same time, that anytime that you change something, there's going to be people who are angry about that. And so it's an uphill battle. So the women who went through the women's suffrage movement really, really did make a difference for people like myself to be able to do what I do today. And I am always thankful whenever I see a display of just what it took to get us here, because I can use my voice, I can vote, I can do all of these things now as a woman. And that is incredible. And at the same time, it makes me question, why couldn't we do that in the first place? You know, I think everyone should be treated equally, and these women did too. And these women are the voice that we should remember all these years later as women. So this room is pretty cool because it gives us an idea about all of the different women throughout the history of this area. There's a few more things that I want to show you, and then we're going to head out to the gift shop and see what's inside. This is the Girl Scouts, and they were formed in 1912, and at that point women could not even yet vote, and so they created different levels to help women to be empowered within different skills. The Girl Scouts later came to Colorado in 1917 and started in Colorado Springs, then soon made their way over to the Buena Vista area. Inside this room also there are some toys that were designed for children of the times. These were from around 1950. Back there from 1920 is the tale of Peter Rabbit. In this case, we have the story of Maud Marie Wool, and she was a local teacher. And it tells here that in 1893, she was born, and in 1909, her family moved to this area. She graduated from school right here in the area, and then she was one of only 8 girls. She obtained her teaching certificate, and then after doing so, she ended up coming back to the community and making a difference. We also learn about the female barber of Guffey, Viola Sally, and in this case, you see some of the items that are synonymously known for her time. And this is one of the more interesting stories of the West because typically they focus on the men and the men's stories. However, towns started to crop up, and as towns started to crop up, they needed to have services. And with these services came barbers. Now the odds were definitely stacked against her, but she was pretty successful. See, after her heyday had kind of simmered down, she moved to just a little plot of land and was just living her life, and she had an altercation with her neighbor, decided to fire a warning shot. The neighbor thought she was crazy, reported her, and she was institutionalized. That happened to a lot of strong women back in the day. You could have institutionalization for many, many things, but that warning shot, that was her story. But yeah, pretty interesting room as a whole. I definitely encourage you to come here and read some of these things. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. Moving toward the gift shop, more historic photos. They're everywhere, guys. I definitely can't express enough how much you just need to like take some time and just look at these and read about them. In this last room, we have the gift shop, but we also have the parlor and kitchen collection. And here you can find a variety of different items that are just incredible. The carving on these is so beautiful, so beautiful. Okay guys, that's gonna do it for us here at the museum today. It was incredible. I highly recommend stopping off. And again, it's only $5. There's a few other things that are outside that I kind of showed you at the beginning of the video. They're pretty neat, but definitely this should be on your bucket list if you're ever coming to this community. Remember, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time. This has definitely been that. Till next time, bye. This place was epic.